Welcome to Global. I'm John Sopel. It's another bit of bad news for the full English breakfast. Bacon and sausages or any kind of processed meat is being blamed for shortening your lifespan. A study involving nearly 500,000 people across Europe found a link between poor quality meat and heart disease and cancer. Well, high levels of salt and sugar and saturated fat are blamed. How can Global ever be bad for you? Well, here for Global is our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
People who eat a lot of processed meat, like bacon, ham and salami, tend to have unhealthy lifestyles. They're more likely to smoke and to eat fewer fruit and vegetables. A new study involving nearly 500,000 Europeans takes these factors into account. But it still finds the more processed meat someone eats, the greater their chance of early death.
It's likely that the issue with processed meat is to do with the saturated fat and salt content of it. Saturated fat is linked to raised LDL cholesterol levels, the bad cholesterol, and too much salt is linked to hypertension, raised blood pressure.
Those who ate more than 160 grams of processed meat each day, roughly 2 sausages and a piece of bacon, increased the risk of dying from heart disease by more than 70% and dying from cancer by 11%. The government recommends eating no more than 70 grams of red and processed meat a day, around 2 rashers of bacon. But some cancer experts advise avoiding processed meat altogether.
World Cancer Research Fund's research shows that essentially eating any amount of processed meat does increase your risk of bowel cancer, and because there's no particular nutritional need for us to eat processed meat, our advice is really to cut it out whenever possible and not include it as part of your diet.
This latest study is further evidence that eating too much processed meat like ham or sausages or bacon can be bad for your health. But many shoppers here today seem to think it's a case of everything in moderation.
I think if you eat it in proportion, then, you know, it's not really a big thing, really.
So I see you got a kipper, that's a kipper in your bag.
I believe that oily fish is good for you and that bacon is bad, although not as bad as all that. Not like cigarettes.
We're young kids in the house. Yes, obviously we don't have cooked breakfast every morning or anything like that, but yeah, I think everybody could cut down, couldn't they?
The authors of this study argue 3% of premature deaths could be prevented if people ate just 20 grams of processed meat each day. That's just one small slice of bacon. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined by Alison Hornby from the British Dietetic Association. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. Were you surprised when you heard these figures?
I was a bit surprised by how massive the difference was in your heart disease risk if you're eating these foods regularly. 70% is a fair difference in risk. Also, the 11% for cancer is also quite a shocking statistic when you consider it.
I just wonder how seriously people should take these warnings, because we've had warnings about butter, then we have warnings about kind of some margarines, and then we have a warning about red meat, and, you know, it's what can I do? What can I do that's safe and good?
Well, really, the message we want to put out there is that we're not here to tell you not to do the things that you love. We're here to encourage people to make alternative choices so that the volume of red meat and the amount of processed meat they're eating in the course of, say, a week goes down. The less you're eating of these processed meats, the safer you are.
Right, we've got some very succulent, sizzling-looking bacon behind us.
Yes.
Bad.
Bacon is bad news if you're having more than 20 grams equivalent a day. Now, a rasher and a half of bacon comes out at about 50 grams. So really, again, if we're thinking about a typical week, you only really want to be having bacon once or twice a week.
OK, let's go to another. Come on, let's see what else we've got here. Gorgeous-looking sausages there. Again, bad?
I'm afraid so, but I'm...
You're here as the misery, aren't you, today? You're just here to tell us what we can't... Go on, tell us about sausages.
I would like to also encourage people to think of all the delicious alternatives that there are to sausages, and the occasional sausage is not going to be such a problem if you're also choosing other protein foods like chicken, fish, whole grains on other days of the week. So this isn't a daily part of your diet, it's an occasional thing. OK,
I get the sausages and I get the bacon, because here we are in the UK and the full English breakfast, you can see it's pretty heavy. Actually, let's just go on to the next one. Salami. Now, if you go to the continental Europe, we always are told that the Mediterranean lifestyle, very healthy, good eating, loads of salami there.
It's true. These are the sort of meats that people often overlook when we're talking about processed meats. We don't immediately perhaps think of salami and ham and so on. If you look at the eating pattern of the Mediterranean countries, though, what you'll find is these are fairly sparingly used. They're not eaten in huge quantities and they're not eaten every day. And that's really the key point, that we could adopt that kind of eating pattern ourselves.
You clearly weren't with the BBC team in Rome when we were having antipasti before our dinner last week, when we were waiting for all the details of the conclave to emerge, which we're still waiting for. Right, let's go on, which I think is going to be my favourite now, which is the prosciutto crudo, or Parma ham, or whatever you want to call it.
Wonderful flavour, delicious food. You don't need much. The idea with this kind of food, if you're going to include it in your diet, is to have it sparingly. Have it with plenty of salad and lovely avocado and rocket we can see in the picture there. Those foods are going to protect you from heart disease and cancer. And actually, while we're talking about lowering the quantities of these processed meats, really important is also to boost up the protective foods in your diet, like fruit and veg.
Right, just one more, because this is not processed meat, I don't think we're going to show you, but it's a ready meal.
Now, ready meals are a difficult group to generalise about, because there are actually some quite decent ready meals out there without processed meat in them, or with very little below the level that we're talking as the desirable level. But on the other hand, there are some ready meals, as we know from the recent scandals, that are absolutely undesirable foods. They're full of processed meat and very high in salt and additives.
And Alison, tell me this. It's all about the salt content, because the too much salt is bad for you, yeah?
Well, what we really need now is a bit more research. It seems that the salt and the preservatives in processed meats are the problem, but we don't know how it is they're causing the risk profile to shoot up so high.
So what about smoked salmon, or smoked trout, or, you know, pickled fish, whatever?
Yeah, well, the message today is really to be wary with the processed red meats, because we've got really strong data on that these foods are really unhelpful foods that we don't need to be including in our diet. The story with fish is a little less obvious. It's not such a direct risk, and we'd really be encouraging people to include fish as much as they can in their diet, and fresh fish ideally where they can.
Alison, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Lentils and salad for dinner tonight. Yum. Can't wait. Right, Ben James is in the World's newsroom looking at how the rest of the world eats. Ben, what have you been finding out? Oh, look, you're in a kitchen.
Well, I am in the kitchen, and you've been looking at beautiful pictures of food. I'm going to go one better and have the glamorous end of this job. Let's rifle through the bins here on the fifth floor of the BBC. We've got a dessert in there. Someone's been having a coffee there, and a bit of sugar in there. People are obviously putting that in their tea here on the fifth floor. This is the gateway to the world, because this is where all of the BBC's language services are based. And we're going to take this story global now. Let's speak to a colleague from the Bengali, the Brazilian and the Chinese services. Wei Liang, first of all, from Chinese BBC. Is this a story that will be affecting Chinese consumers? Would they have had 160 grams of processed meat today?
Not really. I mean, in China, processed meat is still not the major part of the diet, although processed meat in China has a long history. But processed meat in Chinese diet is the main purpose of the processed meat is to enhance flavor. It's not the substance of the diet.
And it's a bit like some soups, I suppose, you do get in stews in Europe that might have a bit of salami flavouring the soup, but maybe it's not always the substance. How about, Bruno, in Brazil? Big meat consumers, I think, but of the processed variety?
Yeah, as you said, we are big meat consumers. I mean, I always crave for meat whenever I go there, but processed meat, not as much. It's more of a snack food. It's more eaten when you go out with friends to have a beer or so, not for lunch and dinner. That's not as popular, although you do have it. And there's some dried meats and some sausages that you have on Brazil's most popular dish, which is feijoada, the famous bean stew, where you have loads of different meats inside, but I think not as regular as you have elsewhere.
But then also the beans as well, which we know are pretty good for us. Sabir, from a Bengali point of view, we were just talking and hearing a conversation there about the various warnings that we hear, studies showing that food is or is not good for you, or indeed both within the space of a few months. Is this something that Bengali consumers would be reading and concerned about?
Well, they'll relate to it, although processed meat is not very widely used, but there is a lot of concern about use of chemicals to preserve fish, for instance, preserve vegetables. That's the main concern. concern in Bangladesh. And Bengalis also have a dried fish variety, which is called shutki, but there is no chemical used there, but it's a preserved and it's a dried fish, and it makes one hell of a smell. So if you can't smell, if you can't stand the smell, you can eat it. If you can't, you can't.
Not something I've noticed in the kitchen here today. And one thing you were all saying actually before we were having a conversation, and my international colleagues here since living in London perhaps have been converted to the ways of the British fryer, so that's perhaps something that we have to answer for.
Ben, our very own alley cat going through the bins that's inside Broadcasting House. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks so much. In a few minutes, we'll be looking at the controversial admission